Military operations usually end in one of two ways: victory or failure. They are marked by announcements, press briefings, or at least official explanations. But some operations don't end like that. Some are quietly stopped. No ceremony, no final report made public, no clear explanation. This is the story of a U.S. military operation that began with urgency, continued in silence, and then simply ended without answers. It's a story not of a grand battle or a famous campaign, but of a quiet disappearance from the official record, a mission that faded into obscurity, leaving behind more questions than it answered. Every military operation begins with a reason, a perceived threat, a strategic concern, an unexpected development that forces a response. In this case, officials believed action was necessary, and quickly. Resources were approved at high levels. Personnel were assigned from specialized units. Equipment, some of it advanced, was moved into position. The operation wasn't publicly discussed in detail, but internally, it was treated as a priority. This wasn't a training exercise. It wasn't routine surveillance. Something had triggered concern at the highest levels of command, something that required a swift, decisive, yet discreet response. The gears of a major military effort began to turn, but they did so in the shadows, away from the public eye. Once underway, activity increased. Units were repositioned, sometimes under the cover of darkness. Support systems were activated, drawing on a complex network of logistics that spanned different branches of the service. Those involved later described the early phase as intense, but controlled. There was a clear sense of purpose, a shared understanding that what they were doing was important. Yet from the outside, almost nothing was visible. There were no headlines in the major newspapers, no official statements explaining the scope or purpose of the mission. The operation existed. It was real and tangible for those on the ground, but for everyone else, it was mostly out of public view, a ghost in the machine. As time passed, weeks turning into months, questions began to surface. Why were certain areas suddenly restricted to access? Why were details about this particular operation classified at higher levels than usual, even for sensitive military matters? Why was information so tightly controlled, even among the lie departments? Journalists who followed defense matters started to notice unusual movements of personnel and equipment. Independent observers noted inconsistencies in official flight logs and shipping manifests. But official responses, when they came at all, were minimal. When asked directly, spokespeople would describe the operation as ongoing or routine, without offering any further explanation. No timeline was provided. No specific objectives were clearly outlined. The silence wasn't alarming yet, but it was noticeable. Then, something changed. It wasn't a sudden event, not a dramatic withdrawal announced on the evening news. Instead, it was a gradual shift. Activity on the ground slowed. Resources began to be quietly withdrawn. Personnel were reassigned to other duties, their temporary deployments ending without fanfare. The complex support systems that had been activated began to scale back, but there was no announcement, no mission complete banner, no press release declaring the operation suspended. From the outside, it appeared as if the entire effort was simply fading away. Internally, those who had been part of it noticed the change, but were given new orders. Externally, almost no one was told anything at all. Eventually, the operation was no longer active. The assets were gone, the personnel dispersed. Yet there was still no clear official statement explaining why it had stopped. When references to the operation appeared in later government documents or historical reviews, they were brief and clinical. When the occasional curious historian or journalist asked about it, the answers were vague and non-committal. The operation was not labeled a failure. It was not declared a success. It was simply ended. And that raised the most obvious question of all. Why would you start a significant military operation, dedicate resources and personnel to it, and then end it without any public explanation? Historically, operations can end quietly for many reasons. The initial objectives may change as the situation evolves. Conditions on the ground might become unfavorable. The political or strategic risks may begin to outweigh the potential benefits. Sometimes, new intelligence alters the original assessment, making the mission obsolete. And sometimes, national priorities simply shift elsewhere, diverting funding and attention to more pressing concerns. But in most cases, even when an operation is quietly concluded, there is at least an internal record, a post-mortem. Here, the public record was minimal. There was no public review board. No lessons learned document was ever released. No retrospective analysis was ever published. There was just a quiet conclusion, leaving a void filled only by unanswered questions. History tends to focus on clear outcomes. It remembers the battles won, the missions lost, the pivotal moments that fit into clean, understandable narratives, operations without dramatic endings, without clear winners or losers, often fade away. They aren't actively denied or hidden in a conspiracy. They are simply not revisited. They become footnotes in larger reports than mere line items in archives. Over time, references to them disappear from active memory. Institutional interest fades, and the silence that began as a policy of discretion becomes a permanent state of being forgotten. This is how a piece of history can vanish in plain sight. This military operation didn't end with headlines. It didn't end with closure or parade. It ended quietly, without explanation, and without a clear place in history. And that is precisely why it remains a mystery. Not because it was a secret that was kept forever, but because its story was never fully told, its purpose never fully explained. Some operations end in victory, some end in defeat, and some end without answers.